They wiped out ancient empires, burned cities to the ground, and then vanished into thin air. No name, no origin, no trace, just destruction. So who were the Sea People, and how did they almost erase history? You've heard of the fall of mighty Egypt, the collapse of the Hittite Empire, the burning of Troy, and the mysterious Dark Age that followed. But what if I told you those weren't isolated events? What if one shadowy force was behind it all? In this video, we're diving deep, like deep sea trench deep, into one of the most baffling mysteries in all of history. The Sea People. Were they refugees, raiders, aliens, mercenaries, or something even stranger? Stay till the end, because what we uncover might just change how you see the ancient world. Alright, let's rewind to around 1200 BCE. This was the peak of what we now call the Late Bronze Age. Civilizations were booming. You had powerful kingdoms like Egypt's New Kingdom under Ramesses the Great, the Mycenaean Greeks building palaces and writing in Linear B, the Hittites ruling Anatolia, and the Minoans and Cypriots thriving through maritime trade. It was a golden age, almost globalized in its own way. Trade routes stretched from the Aegean to Mesopotamia. Tin and copper flowed to make bronze. Everyone was eating well, worshipping their gods, and minding their palaces. And then suddenly, like a bad plot twist, everything collapsed. Entire cities were burned to ash. Palaces were abandoned. Writing systems vanished. Trade stopped. Cultures that had lasted for centuries fell like dominoes within a few decades. Historians and archaeologists have been asking for centuries. What the hell happened? The answer might lie in a single mysterious term that appears over and over in the Egyptian records. The Sea Peoples. That's what the Egyptians called them. They were like the boogeymen of the Bronze Age, described as coming from the sea, attacking in massive waves, destroying cities, and then disappearing. And they weren't just a single group, this was a confederation of different tribes or peoples. Names like the Peleset, Shurden, Denyen, Jeker, and Lukka show up in the records. But let's talk about the receipts, the actual proof we have that these guys existed. Our best evidence? Ancient Egyptian inscriptions, especially from the reigns of Pharaoh Merneptah and his son, Ramesses III. Around 1208 BCE, Merneptah recorded a battle where he defeated a group called the Sea Peoples, trying to invade Egypt. But the real blockbuster comes from Ramesses III. At his mortuary temple in Medinet Habu, he left a series of reliefs and inscriptions that are basically the ancient version of a military documentary. It shows ships clashing, warriors in horned helmets, and lines like, "No land could stand before their arms." Ramesses III said the Sea Peoples swept across the Mediterranean like wildfire, crushing the Hittites, razing Cyprus, storming through Canaan, and then marching on Egypt. But here's the kicker. After Ramesses III defeated them in a massive land and sea battle, they vanish. Gone. Poof. No written records. No cities. No monuments. No history. So, who the hell were they? Let's explore some theories, starting with the most grounded. One theory says they were simply refugees, people displaced by famine, drought, or natural disasters. Around this time, there's evidence of a massive climate shift. Tree ring data and ice core samples suggest the region faced years of drought and crop failure. If your land dried up and your kids were starving, you might pack up and head somewhere with food and water. Now imagine thousands of people doing that all at once, armed and desperate. These weren't weekend campers. These were hardened warriors, and they wanted a new home. Another theory? Mercenaries turned rogue. The Late Bronze Age had tons of mercenary soldiers. Egyptian records even show some Sea Peoples, like the Shurden, working for the pharaohs as guards. But what if, when times got bad, those hired swords decided to carve out their own kingdoms? It wouldn't be the first time a government hired muscle that later became the threat. And then there's the idea that they were pirates. The Mediterranean was full of trade ships during this time, and piracy was a real problem. Some historians think the Sea Peoples started as raiders, then grew in number and ambition until they became a tidal wave of destruction. But these pirates didn't just steal, they burned cities. They wiped out entire cultures. That's next level. There's also a theory that pins the Sea Peoples to actual known cultures. Some think they were Mycenaeans, the same Greeks who built the palaces of Tiryns and Mycenae, and whose culture mysteriously vanished around the same time. Maybe their own lands were falling apart, and they joined the chaos elsewhere. The Denyen, for example, might be linked to the Danaans of Greek legend. Others suggest the Peleset were the Philistines. Yep, the same Philistines who show up in the Bible as the enemies of the Israelites. And archaeological digs in Philistine cities like Ashkelon and Ekron show sudden changes in pottery and architecture that match Aegean styles, suggesting newcomers from the sea. Some theories go even wilder. One idea connects them to the lost city of Atlantis, suggesting the Sea Peoples were survivors of a sunken civilization. Another links them to the Trojans after their city fell. Maybe the survivors became sea raiders out of desperation. And yes, some even suggest aliens. Not joking, that's how mysterious this group is. When no solid answer fits, people start looking to the stars. But let's pull back from the wild for a second. Here's the real kicker. We may never know who the Sea Peoples actually were. Not because the evidence isn't there, but because they didn't write anything down. Most ancient cultures left behind writing, even if it was just receipts or God prayers. The Sea Peoples? Nothing. No language. No alphabet. No monuments. They were illiterate or secretive, or both. That makes them almost invisible in the historical record. But what we do know is this. Their arrival caused one of the biggest societal collapses in human history. The Bronze Age ended. The Hittite Empire vanished. Mycenaean Greece fell into a dark age. Trade routes broke down. Literacy disappeared for centuries. Imagine living in a world of palaces, metal tools, and organized religion, then watching it all burn and crumble. That's what happened to an entire region. And it took hundreds of years for civilization to claw its way back. Now let's introduce a new problem. What if the Sea Peoples weren't the cause, but the effect? What if they were just the symptom of something much worse? This is where the mystery deepens. Some scholars argue that the Sea Peoples didn't cause the collapse. They were just riding the wave. The real culprits might have been a perfect storm of problems. Climate change, drought, famine, earthquakes, economic breakdown, political instability, and boom, civilization goes bust. When society weakens, it only takes a little push to send it over the edge. And the Sea Peoples? They were that push. They were the final blow in a world already teetering. We have evidence of earthquakes hitting key cities, droughts killing crops, trade networks collapsing under their own weight. And if you were a hungry warrior watching all this go down, you might think, now's the perfect time to strike. In that sense, the Sea Peoples weren't masterminds, they were opportunists. And yet, the destruction they left behind was so widespread, so brutal, that it's impossible to write them off as just scavengers. They were organized, coordinated, military level. The battles described by Ramesses III aren't just raids. They were invasions. He talks about massive fleets, huge armies, land invasions. That doesn't happen by accident. So maybe they were both, the match and the gasoline. Let's hit the climax. What's the final takeaway here? The Sea Peoples remain one of history's biggest cold cases. We have the crime scene. We have the bodies. But no suspect. They may have been a mix of cultures. Maybe some were Mycenaeans, others Philistines, some pirates, others mercenaries, others climate refugees. A whole confederation of displaced, desperate, and dangerous people with nothing to lose. They didn't leave behind a single scroll. No cities, no leader's name, just fire, bones, and crumbling walls. And then, they vanished. Maybe they were absorbed into new lands, like the Philistines in Canaan. Maybe they died off. Maybe their children became the next generation of Mediterranean settlers. Whatever the truth, they changed the course of history. The world after them looked nothing like the world before. Egypt never fully recovered. The Greeks lost their written language for centuries. The Hittites disappeared forever. All because of a group we still can't identify. They were the ghosts of the ancient sea. Mysterious, violent, and unforgettable. Want to unravel more forgotten mysteries? Tap the next video before history buries it again.